That it's 10 o'clock and we have a quorum. Let's call the meeting to order. California Architects Board. And Mr. Vice President, will you take roll call?
Yes, I will. Tian Pen here. Pascal Gutierrez here. Sylvia Kong
Here?
Ebony Louis. Not in yet.
Yes.
Matthew McGinnis.
Here.
Rob Pearman.
Here.
Neil Tasserano.
Here.
Barry Williams.
Is excused.
Excused
Yeah.
today? Okay. We exactly have 6 board members.
Okay, so we have a quorum and we can begin business. Okay. So I'm going to begin by just having a few procedural remarks. I want to let you know that the meeting is being webcast today. And in a little while, LATC board member Susan Landry will be coming, so we can wave at her when she shows up. That might be her. Let's see. Nope, that was not her. Now I'm going to introduce 2 very special guests. Mike Armstrong, who's the CEO of NCARB, and his sidekick, which I wrote down. I got your name properly. Josh Batkin, who's Director of Council Relations. And we welcome you coming all the way from D.C. to visit us.
You bet.
Thank you so much for being here. They're going to be making a presentation to us under Agenda Item D shortly. And we will be taking a lunch break from 12 to 1:30. So those of you who want to take a break can do so at the same time if you wish. So just so you know, I want to reiterate the voting requirements for this meeting. All motions and seconds will be repeated for the record. And votes on all motions will be taken by roll call. And Mr. Tian Feng here will be a wonderful vice president who will do that, since I'll be making an appointment to secretary, but that'll be later on in the meeting. And the public members that are here, the signing list at the door is optional. So if you'd like to be listed, go ahead and sign in, otherwise not necessary. At this point, I'd like to see if there are any public comments on items that are not on the agenda. Yes.
Good morning. Okay. Good morning, President Kwan, Vice President Feng, Executive Officer Zuniga, board members. Hello.
Hello.
Good to see you all again.
That's
It's been a few months. Karen Nelson, Assistant Deputy Director with Office of Board and Bureau Services at DCA, Department of Consumer Affairs. Wanted to just share a couple of brief remarks, but first of all, wanted to congratulate Ms. Zuniga for her recent appointment as Executive Officer and for your first board meeting today. I've had the pleasure of working with Ms. Zuniga at CSLB and excited to continue working with her here at the Architects Board. A couple of updates with department activities recently. The first one is with the Directors Teleconference and Quarterly Meeting. On June 25th, the Director hosted his first board member and advisory committee leadership call. And with over 30 participants in that call, which included board presidents, vice presidents, chairs, vice chairs, and advisory committee members, we talked about some updates specific to the department, such as pro rata, Assembly Bill 2138, and some regulatory process improvements. And with the initial success of that teleconference, we do plan to host another one before the end of the year, potentially in December. So please be on the lookout for that. President, Vice President. We'll make sure to send that over to you all when that date has been confirmed. This month, actually last month, August 6th, we had our Directors Quarterly Meeting, which included presentations from the Department of General Services, DCA's Equal Employment Opportunity Office, and DCA's Office of Human Resources. DGS previewed their plan for new construction that will house DCA in 2024. And the Equal Employment Opportunity Office provided a primer on implicit bias, and the Office of Human Resources shared some new improvements on HR processes specific to recruitment and adverse actions. The next Directors Quarterly Meeting is scheduled for October 29th. We're looking forward to having Ms. Zuniga there at the next meeting. And the other thing I wanted to update you all on is on our licensing and enforcement work groups. which we launched in April, and the goal is to convene our executive officers, key licensing and enforcement staff to really look at best practices in the areas of licensing and enforcement. We wanted to thank the board for continuing to send their staff and really continuing that dialogue and contributing to some of the areas in which we can improve as a department in efficiencies and business practices. The last thing I wanted to provide an update on is our DCA leadership training, the Future Leadership Development Program, which I do believe Kristen Walker was part of our first cohort. They kicked off the second cohort today, and actually Brianna Miller was also part of that cohort. I apologize, Brianna. We received 48 applications during the recruitment process, of which 7 were selected to participate in this cohort. We do hope that the board will go ahead and promote this program to their managers and up-and-coming leaders, and for the I guess the third cohort, which will be coming in the next year. And that concludes the department update. And again, good to see you all again.
May we ask questions?
I will defer to your legal on that. I
No?
don't believe so.
Yes, no?
Yeah, since this is under public comment, it's best that the
Okay.
board doesn't discuss.
Okay.
If you do have any questions, feel free to go ahead and communicate that to your executive officer, and I'm happy to
Very
work with
good.
her on that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the update. Okay, so you guys are on already. Okay, Mike and Josh, welcome.
Good morning, California. Some of you are aware I'm a native Californian, spent my childhood and law school years here. It's always great to be back on what I call the best coast. So, and many of you are volunteering for our committees, which we really appreciate, and your contributions to the national conversation continue to be really significant. Your most immediate former board member, John Baker, is now back on our national board of directors as the Region 6 director. And as you might expect, John has hit the ground running with lots of questions, comments, opinions, and challenges. So we would expect no less, and we're glad to have him there. With me today is Josh Shabackin, who is our Director of Council Relations. And for some of you that aren't as familiar with NCARB, let me just give you a little bit of NCARB 101. So we are the nonprofit organization created by the state licensing boards almost 100 years ago to do things for all of you that you aren't able to do, or that might be more cost efficient if we do it for you. So we are advisory to you. We don't have any independent legal authority or governmental status, but we create what I call the toolkit for your regulatory tools. So the exam, the ARE, is an NCARB product that is created by architect volunteers who write exam questions, overseen by psychometricians who specialize in the science of test writing, and managed by subject matter experts in test delivery and test administration. The criteria for our experience program, the AXP, the Architectural Experience Program, are contained in guidelines that the Board of Directors reviews, and we have a standing committee called the Experience Committee that advises the membership on potential changes to these criteria. So the experience requirements represent a consensus opinion nationally, and then it is advisory to each of our jurisdictions to decide whether to adopt or adapt that program. And then regarding education, we say that to get a license there are the 3 E's: education, experience, and examination. We have education guidelines that prefer the degree from a NAB accredited program, but a number of our member jurisdictions, including California, recognize education that is not from an accredited program as a qualifier for licensure. But you also prefer the NAB accredited degree. If they don't have that, they will have to pursue extra experience. And that's also our requirement nationally if a licensee comes to us requesting an NCARB certificate, which is the reciprocity passport program that we manage. And that certificate program requires that you meet minimum criteria. If you don't have a degree from a NAB accredited program, you can either do 2 times the AXP requirements, or you can submit a portfolio of your work and have architect peers assess whether your portfolio meets the requirements for education and experience. So we provide you the toolkit to get to licensure, and then we manage the post-licensure certification program. In recent years, we have seen, not necessarily in California, but in a number of other states, a lot of questioning around the value of regulation, the value of licensure. And so Josh's department has stood up a new mission around equipping people at the grassroots level to inform state legislatures about how our programs work and why they are valuable. And we've had great success partnering with other regulatory disciplines as well as grassroots organizations representing membership organizations such as the AIA and others. So we have a more robust presence around advocacy than we might have had 3 or 4 years ago. And Josh's department also liaisons with with Laura and all of her counterparts around the country. We regularly try to inform the member board executives through our monthly Fast Facts newsletter. We're constantly checking in to see if there are customer service issues that we can be improving. You have now in the past 2 years, you have an assigned customer service liaison to work with you to expedite any inquiries regarding record management or concerns you have about credentials leading to licensure. And we're very interested in knowing, are there other services that we could be providing or that we could be improving. So we're getting ready to celebrate our 100-year anniversary next June, and we hope many of you will plan on attending our annual business meeting, which will be in Washington, D.C. And we'll talk in a moment about our upcoming Chairs and Executives Summit that's going to be in St. Louis in October. So that's a little overview on who we are and what we do. We're based in Washington, D.C. We have around 100 people working at NCARB. The largest department is customer service, answering the phones and answering email. We have over 100,000 record holders that are regularly asking questions of us, be they people on the path to licensure or people in the post-licensure certification program. We have a large information systems department. More and more our mission is really about information management. And then Josh's department, marketing and communications, and our smaller subject matter departments, experience education and examination, support our committees and conduct outreach visits. We visit all of the accredited college programs every other year around the United States. We partner with the AIAS and the student chapters around the country, and we look for opportunities to talk about the value of licensure, why it matters, why protecting the public is still relevant, and why what you do is really the best example of citizen participation in government. And my own background is that I was a government employee for a number of years in state, local, and federal government. I used to advise boards and commissions and write legislation at the local government level. So I'm empathetic regarding your role and your responsibility, and we want to make sure that we're serving you in the best way that we can. So that's sort of a bit of an opening statement, Madam Chair.
Wow. That was good.
You've listed out a number of subjects to address this morning, and I know you have a heavy agenda. So I'll try to move at a pace that's appropriate. And if any of you if I'm calling out jargon or talking over your head, just wave at me and I'll take a breath and slow down. I don't want anyone to make an assumption as to how familiar all of you are. How many of you were at our annual business meeting in Detroit in June? Okay, so if I get it wrong or misrepresent what happened, please correct me. So NCARB meets annually, usually the third weekend of June. The purpose of this meeting is several-fold. This is when we formally elect our board of directors for the coming year. We consider this an annual business meeting, so we share our financials through a treasurer's report. We look for ways to, through a workshop approach, educate our member board members regarding NCARB programs or other skill sets that you might need as a state licensing board member, or issues of controversy, or perhaps thematic or emerging issues that we want to start talking about so we can get a sense of what your reaction might be if we want to do some things that are different. This year, we had a keynote speaker who is a futurist who I hope was you found to be provocative, maybe got you a little bit uncomfortable. That was the goal. Just to think about this changing world we live in and how architecture is changing as a practice, how regulation has to change and evolve, and how do we maintain a sense of momentum when everything around us seems to be in a state of flux. And so he sort of got us going, and we had workshops on a variety of topics. We had several resolutions that were passed. We had what I call several housekeeping resolutions. We realigned our requirements for acquiring health, safety, welfare, continuing education credit into the same 6 categories that we use for the exam and for the AXP program. So this was just designed to get our house in order so we're all speaking the same language. So we didn't eliminate any HSW qualifications, but we realigned them into these 6 buckets that are referred to as the phases of practice. So that was one of our resolutions. We closed a loophole in our requirement if someone wants to pursue an NCARB certificate and doesn't have a NAB accredited degree. We were making everybody have an evaluation of their transcript of their education, regardless of whether they had a semester or 3.5 years. There's a subset of those people where doing an assessment of their transcript is a waste of time. It doesn't give us any usable information that can help us make a decision on what kind of experience they need. So we were making them spend over $3,000 and wait a number of months for useless information. So the adjustment in this resolution was to get rid of that for those people that don't need to do it. We did a wholesale makeover of our bylaws. And this is always a little dicey. Anytime you have an omnibus resolution, people are always suspicious about what are you hiding inside there? What little things are you tucking in that you're trying to sneak past us? Fortunately, we gave so many advanced copies of this back to last fall and then early into the spring about what we were doing and why we were doing. We really didn't have a lot of controversy by the time we got to the annual business meeting. It really was time for us to say, you know, the bylaws say this, but in reality we're doing this. So there wasn't necessarily a connection between regular practice and the bylaws. In some cases, the bylaws were redundant, they were outdated, the language was antiquated, even the order in which they were written didn't necessarily make sense. And these had not been looked at holistically for 20 or 30 years. They'd been patched, so to speak. So this was a wholesale makeover, if you will, renovation, to use a building term, and that passed as well. We also adopted something called the Code of Conduct as a model law. Our former President Dennis Ward stood up several years ago an ethics task force and put former President Dale McKinney in charge of this task force. The charge was pretty broad. What's the role of ethics in terms of NCARB programs and in terms of, in the context of the regulatory mission? Now, I come out of the legal profession. Law schools, to be accredited, have to offer a standalone ethics course. And the bar exam has a standalone ethics section. And to renew your license, you have to get separate ethics credits. A similar process exists within medicine. Architecture alone, of all the learned professions, doesn't have this requirement. So what should the requirement be without overburdening the architect? Not saying that we have a huge issue necessarily with architectural ethics, but I think you could argue that revisiting everything from the Me Too movement to the relationship between clients and a team of advisors that includes architects, the opportunities for ethical violation and the higher standard that we want to hold architects to is worth looking at. So the task force made several recommendations. One of their recommendations was to take this old document called the Code of Conduct that had been languishing and not really being used for anything and flip it into a model law that we could then deliver back to you and all your counterpart boards around the country as a starting point for a conversation. Is there something in the language we adopted that you might be able, with the help of your legal counsel, to repurpose into codifying ethics as a basis for disciplinary action beyond what your toolkit currently is for disciplinary action. You may in California already have sufficient language on this topic, but we want to offer this to you as a resource. We'd like you to look at it, see what language in there might be useful to you, and then talk to your legal counsel about how would you Californiaize it so it works for your needs. But I was very proud of our task force because way before Me Too and way before the Richard Meyer controversy broke, the task force had already called out sexual harassment as an issue, and as an issue that related to ethical behavior. And this is difficult because without a finding by a court of law, we don't want to position our member boards into deciding whether someone sexually harassed somebody. But we do think our member boards should be able to do something relative to the license if there is a finding of sexual harassment. Whether that's a suspension or a revocation or a censure or whatever, that's up to you. But we really we've just adopted this, we've just pushed it out. We'd really urge you to look at this language, and we'd like to have an ongoing conversation with you. What do you think is the right level of engagement around ethics as a licensing board and as a state? And we'd like to start comparing notes between states as to what everybody's doing and get a regular conversation going about what's the national trend here. But we felt it was important for us at NCARB to put our marker down. This code of conduct not only is a tool for you, it's an aspirational statement of who we are at the national level as an organization. We are now going to be notifying all NCARB certificate holders every year when they renew their certificate that this code of conduct exists, and we expect our certificate holders to read it, understand it, and embrace it. So we want to be walking the walk as well as talking the talk. So those were the 4 resolutions that were adopted. And Josh, you want to highlight any of the workshops or anything else from the ABM?
Well, we had several workshops that focused on raising your profile as a member board and engaging with policymakers and others to explain the value of the work that you do. We had a workshop that really focused on the importance of public engagement and public involvement. I know your board has an equal number of public members on it, and we had our public member director on our national board, Daryl Ham, as well as a public member from Iowa, Colby DeWitt, and our president-elect, Terry Allers, who gave a workshop that gave attendees an opportunity to think about the important voice of the public in every decision that they make, and how can they ensure that they're interacting and engaging that group throughout all of their decisions. We had one other workshop. Well, we had the workshop with the futurist as well. Yes. He stayed behind and spoke with folks and allowed them to ask him additional questions and go into greater detail too.
We don't know yet at this next annual meeting if we will have any resolutions. We had an annual meeting a little over a year ago where we didn't have any, and everyone said, oh my God, I'm not sure that's ever happened before. And it wasn't a bad thing because it allowed us to take a breath. In the past, during my 7-year tenure, we've streamlined the ARE, reinvented the AXP, revised the alternative paths to certification, introduced the IPAL initiative regarding an integrated path where you do all 3 steps while you're in school, and upped our game with customer service, information technology, outreach and advocacy, public information and awareness. We've done a lot, and I think there's some appreciation for just taking a breath, checking where are we? Are we all here? Are we all kind of running at the same pace? And we're sort of sensing now that it's time to pivot over to what I call a back to basics posture. We have enough new people on our licensing boards around the country, new executives, that we don't want to take for granted the trust relationship that we've built over the past 100 years with our member boards. Why do we exist? What is it that we do that you are giving us agency, to use a legal term, to do on your behalf? And we want to expose and be transparent around how an exam gets developed, why we have these criteria for experience. Our board of directors is getting ready next summer to go to a first ever event called the Accreditation Review Forum. The NAAB, the National Architectural Accreditation Board, has invited the 5 major architectural collateral organizations, us, the AIA, the ACSA, which is the Collegiate Schools of Architecture, AIS, the students, along with the NAB board itself, all 5 organizations' board of directors to simultaneously discuss the relevance and the value of architectural education as it relates to each of our missions. We've never had all 5 boards meet at the same time, and we believe it's timely because there's a lot of questions about the value of a 4-year degree. Parents are asking about tuition costs, and students are asking about, why do I need this to get a job? Licensing boards such as yourselves have even said, we don't need the accredited degree to license people. So where is architectural education going, and why is it still relevant to what we do? So we're asking a lot of questions ourselves and being told that we are expected to participate in asking questions. So it's sort of timely in light of our centennial. We want the centennial to be a look forward, not just a look back. Are we still going to be relevant in 10 or 20 years? Are you still going to be relevant in 10 or 20 years? Are we going to need an architectural license if everything can be done with the computer and we can check compliance with building codes and talk to the engineer's computer and the interior designer's computer? We hope not. We think that the individual voice and the individual vision still matters, and that protecting the public can't just be done by machines. But we have to be prepared to answer these questions, because our capitalist economy is going to drive cost savings, skipping steps, eliminating people from the conversation. And some of you are already seeing this in your day-to-day practice. So there's this whole future thing is really front of brain for me. So you're going to hear from me in my monthly newsletter more about this, and it'll be a big theme at our centennial next year. We're also getting ready for the every other year Chairs Executives Summit, and this year it is in St. Louis. This is designed to be a smaller gathering of key leaders so we can really roll up our sleeves and talk to each other frankly and listen to each other carefully about, are we really all in this together? What's working? What isn't working? And so I've asked Josh if he could, just to give you some highlights of what's going to happen at that meeting. And I think Chairman Kwan, you're planning on attending?
Yes.
And Laura is hoping that the governor's office will allow her to go?
We're both hoping we get approval.
Yes. You're both waiting. We hope you will be there.
Yeah, I almost booked my flight. So maybe I should not.
We'll talk after.
Okay.
So, Josh, you want to give some highlights?
Thank you, sir. Well, as Mike mentioned, it's a very important gathering. It happens every 2 years of our senior leadership. It allows us to provide you with updates, but also get feedback from all of our member boards. So the first topic of discussion will be an update to our strategic plan. There's a theme here. We updated our bylaws. We're also at the point of updating our strategic plan. So we've had a lot of interaction and engagement with our members over the last 2 years in that process. And the chairs and executives will get an update and sort of a gut check with them on if we're going in the right direction for that. The timetable for the rollout of the strategic plan would be to do that at the annual meeting next summer as part of our centennial celebrations as well. There will be an opportunity for some diversity and inclusion and professional workplace conduct training for all of the attendees. And then we're going to have a discussion from Mike about the renewed focus on support to our boards. And then in the afternoon, after that presentation, we're going to have 4 different workshops where we do a deeper dive into those topics. And the things there's a consistent line with the things we have been discussing over the last couple of years at these meetings. But a deeper dive into educating our policymakers. Some questions about investigations. We're really looking at whether or not NCARB is in a position to provide greater support to our member boards as they investigate challenges with architects in their jurisdictions. So we want to have sort of a listening session. Where are our boards in that process? Do they need additional resources? Would they be open to NCARB providing support in that arena? We're going to talk about communicating the value of the important work that licensing boards do. And then we're going to have a session really focused on the nuts and bolts of facilitating effective meetings. We That's day one. That's a lot. We'll also have a reception that sort of allows us to think about the centennial. We may even have a preview of the book that we're putting together for the centennial, which includes histories of all of our 54 members. So a little hook for the centennial there as well. On day two, I'm sorry, I failed to mention this is October 12th and 13th in St. Louis, Missouri. Day two is going to involve back to that theme of cleaning up older documents. We have this model law task force, which is really going back and looking at our model laws and model regulations that we promulgate for states to consider. And we've had a past president, Dennis Ward, chairing a task force that has been looking at a document that hasn't been holistically updated in a long time either. It's had piecemeal changes, and they've done a lot of work over the last 2 years. They started out looking at what we currently have as existing model law, and with the goal of making it modern, easy to understand, clear, more approachable for state legislators, and they settled on using a FARB model, the Federation of Associations of Regulatory Boards. Did I get that right, Mike? It's an association of boards of organizations like NCARB, 20 or 21 organizations like NCARB. And they have a model statute that they have promulgated. So the task force used that model, compared it to what we have, compared it to the specific needs of architects and regulating architects, and have created a draft of a new model law. This year, they're focused on doing that same process with model regulations. And the hope is to present that to the membership over the next year or two with a potential resolution in 2020. And we are very happy that Mr. Gutierrez, just this year, has joined that task force. You had Laura's predecessor was on the task force, and we've been able to keep that California focus and engagement, which we thought was very important. So Pasquale came to the first meeting in August and can give you more information about that as well. Did I do okay there?
Exactly.
Okay. All right, great. So that's our model law task force, and there will be an opportunity for a hands-on participation in that process at this meeting. As Mike mentioned, the accreditation review forum comes up next year. We're going to have Kevin Flynn, who is the incoming president of NAB, the president-elect. He will be there to present an update on where that forum stands, what is happening with that. And then Dave Hoffman, our current president, will talk about how all members and member boards can engage in providing advice and guidance and support to the board before they head into that meeting. And then we're going to have a breakout session for all of the member board chairs and all of the member board executives, which will be hosted by a couple of our leaders as well. An opportunity to have conversations about those things that are most of interest and most of concern to you with all of your peers from around the country, so that you can share best practices and give guidance and feedback to the board and to the staff for additional support that you might be interested in. So Dave Hoffman, as our current board president, will be chairing that meeting, and we're hoping that California will join us for it as well.
We'll say a little permission prayer for both of them. So Josh is the staff person for the Model Law Task Force, so obviously you can tell he's very conversant in the topic. I know it's a little dry, and again, for those of you that are newer to the process, we call them model laws. I worked at the International Code Council before I came to NCARB, and I also use what they call model law or model code. And we understand that these, once they land on your desk, might get changed, but it's a starting point, again, if you want to sample what national consensus is around certain issues. Every state takes a few exceptions here and there and tweaks it to make it their own, but the tool, as we mentioned with the bylaws earlier, we've just had these big chunks of what we do that have been patched at a piecemeal level, and each patch made sense at the time, but when you step back and look at the whole thing, it looks confusing and messy. And so we're trying to clean it up. But we know this is a really heavy lift. So that's why you're probably going to get tired of us previewing to you what is in there. We're going to make several runs at this because people, for a variety of reasons, don't pay attention the first or second time they see it, or it's too much and they want to talk face-to-face, they don't want to read anything. Everybody has a different way of absorbing information. And we're going to need to talk to our colleagues at AIA California Council about, should this require statutory change, and if it's something that the state board wants to do, how do we engineer that? What's the process by which we tee things up? And each state is different. We're not going to come in and railroad or go around. We're going to be deferential to your protocols and your process, and of course your legal advisor is the one that needs to give you guidance on how this should all work. But it's going to be probably a top of the list subject matter for the next year and a half from us. Right after the annual business meeting, we issued a statement called our commitment to diversity. And I want to have a pretty direct conversation with all of you about this. And looking around this room, California isn't necessarily one of our states that seems to struggle too much with this issue. But I'm frustrated when I go to a meeting of NCARB member board members, and most of the people in the room are older white males. And it's not fair to blame them, but I think it's important to talk about why that is. And quite simply, it's because that's who the governors appoint. And for people that aren't part of NCARB who come to our meetings, it's a little bit of an eyebrow raiser when we line up our new board of directors in front and there's only one woman and one person of color out of 14. And so we felt a need to sort of explain what we're trying to do regarding diversity. So when we can control things, we are absolutely demonstrating a commitment to diversity. Our committees today are much more diverse than they used to be because we aren't just bringing member board members on. We're recruiting people from the National Organization of Minority Architects. We are recruiting alumni of student organizations that are recently licensed. We are asking first and second year new certificate holders to apply. So we have changed the game when it comes to age, gender, racial background in terms of our committees. Similarly, our staff. If you would walk into the doors of the NCARB office and walk around and meet the staff, you would see a very diverse staff from all walks of life contributing to our overall mission. So we're very proud of that, and we want people to know that. At the same time, we think everyone has to own this pool of member board members that governors appoint. And that includes AIA components where they're able to lobby governors' offices. It includes people who sit on licensing boards that sometimes try to recruit their successors. In some cases, it includes some of Laura's counterparts who are actively involved in recruiting people to serve on licensing boards. We all have to think about this, that if this is about protecting the public, not protecting the profession, how do we make sure that the public has confidence that the people sitting around your table and around my board table are truly reflective of the population of America? And so I think we would love to see more diversity at our national board level, but it starts with who gets appointed to our state boards. And then the path, just so you know, to move up is you start at the regional level and you move up the ladder in regional leadership. And then you can run, and usually what happens is you succeed into a regional director position. Those people usually run for executive committee positions. It doesn't have to happen that way. You can run from the floor. There is a barrier for some people like Sylvia that you have to have an NCARB certificate to serve on our national board. We keep adding more and more alternatives to the certificate, and someday maybe we'll have an alternative that will address some of the uniqueness of some Californians who were licensed without having to pass all sections of the ARE. We hope we get there because we want Sylvia and her colleagues to feel like they have a shot at something like this. But I just felt a need after that annual business meeting, given the optics and given the conversation in the architect community with the Me Too and Richard Meyer and some of these other things, I didn't want anyone to think that NCARB is asleep at the switch or not paying attention to this issue. So Dave Hoffman and I agreed to sign this statement, which we published to everybody. And I hope it came across as that our work isn't done, but that we're really focused on this and we can all do better. So that's the background on that statement. And as Josh mentioned, we're also requiring now training, mandatory training. We do this for our staff every year in terms of inappropriate and appropriate behaviors in the workplace. Every NCARB volunteer legally falls under the NCARB workplace. And so it's important that our board of directors, our committee chairs, our member board chairs and executives all get the same training. Every year there is something that happens about somebody said something to somebody. Unfortunately, every year I've been at NCARB, something has happened. Usually it's between a volunteer and a staff person, unfortunately. My staff person. And I'm not happy about that. So we're going to have to do better. So you're going to get, if you go to the St. Louis meeting, you're going to get training. Not that you need it necessarily, but whether you want it or not, you're going to get training. And I think it's good for us to be on the record that we're doing this. So that's the commitment to diversity piece. Josh talked about model law. Josh also is, as I mentioned earlier, helming this initiative around creating a network of other professions and people at the grassroots level to anticipate legislation and address the fact that architects are different than swimming pool installers, that there's a different level of regulation that's required, and a broad brushstroke approach toward eviscerating licensure and credentialing is not good for the public. You want to talk a little bit about legislative trends?
Just briefly, and I know California has been inured from most of this discussion that's been happening around the country, but not entirely. There is this push to, based upon economic arguments and mobility arguments, to deregulate many different professions. And architects are not ever the primary target of these legislative proposals that are mostly put forward by libertarian-type organizations. But the regulation of architects often gets caught up in these broad brush proposals. And so our interest, again, is not on the profession side, but it is on ensuring that our member boards continue to have the legal authorities that they need to be able to implement their public health, safety, and welfare mission. So we have engaged in areas and in states where those proposals have crossed that line in support of our member boards. We always do it in support of our boards, but we have a number of different tools now that we've developed, as Mike alluded to be able to support you. We've been partnering very closely with a number of other organizations, including AIA National and the state and local components of AIA in those situations. And we've also formed a coalition of partners of organizations like ours. You have these broad brush proposals. The most extreme version is one that ALEC is considering, the American Legislative Exchange Council, that would basically say that you don't need to have a credential or a license for any profession as long as you disclose to the consumer that you don't have a license or a credential for that profession. So you have that is the ultimate embodiment of the idea that the free market will take care of this, and you could just choose your doctor or your architect from Yelp, or look at reviews from other folks. So we have these. I'm not trying to scare you about that. That is a proposal that ALEC is considering promoting to their partners at legislatures around the country. They haven't finalized that, but that's an example of an opportunity, right, for us to be able to engage and explain the value of the work that regulatory boards do to protect the public, the importance of licensure, the importance of making sure that people are qualified and competent to perform the professions that they're engaging in. And as Mike mentioned, we've also tried to draw a distinction there. There are some occupations that don't have the same mobility paradigms in place that architects and lawyers and doctors do, that don't have that same level of education, experience, and examination requirements because they don't have as much of an impact on public health, safety, and welfare. Architectural, the NCARB model, the member board models, the board members around the country, we have a great model that respects state legal and constitutional authorities to protect their citizens, while also facilitating licensure and mobility because of the model standards, the uniform standards, the model laws that we've promulgated based upon your decisions and your votes. You've adopted that across the country. So there is an opportunity to have mobility, which is good for the architect. It's also good for the consumer. And from a public protection level, we made sure that there are minimally competent standards in place all across the country.
So
Yes, ma'am.
mobility means the ability to move from state to state?
Yes,
Is that
yes.
what you mean by that?
Since each state licenses architects, in this case, that has been one of the big issues that these groups have been pushing on, is the fact that you're hurting professions, you're keeping people from being able to move from state to state to get jobs because of these barriers of having to get licensed in each different jurisdiction.
Well, and the complaint is really coming from what I call more the blue-collar professions,
Right.
where there isn't something like the NCARB certificate in place, or there's not an interstate compact. It is a real issue, but the reaction is an overreaction. They're just trying to change the regulations for all professions rather than isolating it
Right.
to the subset of occupations that are being impacted. So you have groups like ALEC, you have the Institute for Justice, you have the organization out of the University of San Diego, and a variety of libertarian groups that are arguing for this broad brushstroke approach. I will say, on a positive note, that we have met with the National Conference of State Legislators, and we've been invited now to present at the Council of State Governments this winter to talk about the fact that there are already models like the NCARB certificate in place that actually could be the solution to some of this. So rather than writing laws that would eviscerate all the work that we've done with you over the last 100 years, they should maybe borrow a page from our book and copy what we're doing. And I think it's important for us to, there is even an emerging vocabulary that occupation refers to people that require less than a 4-year degree. And clearly that means architects aren't on the list. Well, then let's write your proposed legislation in that way. Let's pull back a little bit. We've heard speakers from the Federal Trade Commission who were the successful litigants in the North Carolina Dental Board case argue that they are going to continue to seek litigation opportunities to force the hand of states and state licensing boards to make sure that there's no industry favoritism occurring in your regulatory activities. And that they think, I think it's ironic given that the political right embraces federalism and states' rights when it suits them, but in this kind of a conversation, they're not about states' rights. It's a little bit hypocritical. And so I think we need to figure out what it is we're talking about here. And the good news is this new coalition we put together that includes medical boards, optometrists, physical therapists, a much broader group than just architects that have a common interest, that probably have as much or more firepower at the state legislative level than architects do. It's a nice group to be working with. Yeah. And then I've just been elected to the executive board of the FARB, which is the group of NCARB type organizations, because I want this national group to be leading the charge. I don't want a target on the back of architects here. This is an issue that's beyond just architects, and it's really important.
Yep.
So
we have a good story to tell, and that's all part of it. The streamlining of the experience program that Mike mentioned, the new, I'm jumping into the next items on the agenda, but we have a good story to tell about how we've gotten more efficient and effective at how we regulate, and that our boards are focused on public health, safety, and welfare. And so we're encouraging boards to be more confident in sharing that story, and we're working at the national level to be able to support that too.
So speaking of the fact that regulation can evolve, it doesn't have to remain static. Mm-hmm. The integrated path to architectural licensure, and Pasquale was on the original task force that created this program. We are thrilled that we now have, I want to say, 21 schools and 25 programs. 26 programs. 26 programs that are IPAL accepted. And what this means, again, just to make sure I'm not using jargon here, I mentioned the 3 E's at the beginning of my presentation. And for a number of years now, we've changed our approach so that you could acquire experience credit while you're in school. In fact, currently, you can start getting AXP credit right out of high school. So 2 of those E's are already overlapping. And then on the other end of the spectrum, a number of years ago, we said you could start taking the exam before you finished acquiring experience. So those two E's have been overlapping. So the question was, could we get all three E's to overlap? Could we set up a scenario that while you're in school, you could do all your experience and take each division of the exam? And what would that look like and how would it work? So we had this task force that Pasquale was on where we had academics and regulators just talking about how do we do this in a way that doesn't compromise the value of your education and is not a shortcut and doesn't reduce the rigor of the path to licensure that the non-participants are pursuing. So what we came up with was pretty simple, actually, when all was said and done, which is if a school is interested, there's several things. They have to be NAB accredited. So this is not open to all architecture programs, only NAB accredited programs. What we're doing is not accreditation, and we're not telling people what to teach. We're not interfering with curricula choices or any of the approaches that got them their accreditation. But we ask the schools to align their curriculum so that they have time out of the classroom to fully complete AXP and time out of the classroom to take each division of the exam one time. They don't have to pass, but they have to take each division of the exam once before they get their degree. And so what's happened is that both BARC and MARC programs are involved in IPAL. The BARC programs are usually adding another year to get there. So most BARC programs in IPAL are 6-year programs rather than 5-year programs. The MARC programs, some are keeping the 2-year MARC because they're anticipating they're going to get a lot of their experience before they get into the MARC program. Some are adding a 3rd year. We had our first graduates this spring from Florida and North Carolina. These graduates are people that have come back. They took a break between their undergraduate and their graduate education. So they're sort of ahead of the curve. We haven't seen that first wave of a cohort that enrolled into IPAL as a freshman and then finished IPAL at a 6-year mark. We're still a few years away from that. But we are hopeful that if people are on the fast track to getting their license, they're going to immediately be at a higher economic status, and the distractions that happen in life after you graduate from college won't have distracted you from getting a license because it'll be done. So we think this is going to address underrepresented groups like women and minorities, people from lower economic classes. We think this has a lot of potential, but the dividend we weren't expecting is that people who had given up on being a licensed architect are now getting back in because they see how they can get it while they're in graduate school. So that's a new dividend. So in California, New School, Woodbury, University of Southern California, am I missing one?
USC.
And US.
Yes.
Yeah, I just said University of Southern California.
And,
or SC as we call it, right? Yeah. Are all in. And on the West Coast, we also have Portland State in Oregon that's in. We think we're on the verge of announcing our first historically black college to join, which would be really exciting. We have some holes on the map. New York doesn't have one yet, but we have one school in New York that's looking at it closely. Same with Texas. Not everyone's going to do this in terms of schools. We have some deans and department chairs who feel very strongly that to be an IPAL school would injure their brand as a research institution, and so they don't want to do it. And this isn't for everybody. Not every student is going to be mature enough and focused enough to get through their curriculum and then go to work, get a job, and then take each division of the exam. They're going to need a lot of mentoring. They're going to need good supervision to make this happen. But we have more people enrolled than we thought. We have over 400 people enrolled in IPAL over the 26 programs. We have over 60 that are currently testing for the ARE. So when people talk about pipeline and the lost generation and the future of the profession, remember that between what we've done with IPAL And what we've done with streamlining our programs and what you see in our annual NCAR by the Numbers publication, we are reducing the time to licensure. Our pipelines are full. We're at record levels of people recording experience, taking the exam, and we're at record levels of NCARB certificate holders. So certainly the economy has been helpful, but I have to believe that improving our programs and doing a better job of explaining our programs and working with you and other licensing boards, the partnership we've developed has also made a difference. So we're very optimistic. We've changed the enrollment. It's now a rolling enrollment. We don't have just a window from January to March anymore to apply to be an IPAL school. A school can apply whenever they're ready. So as we get new schools, we will share that news with you. The ARE.
Yes. Oh, excuse me.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Question.
I was waiting because I didn't know if there was going to be Q&A at the end.
There will
Oh,
be.
that's what I was assuming, but we can do it now if you
No,
want.
just you can.
Yeah,
you
go
can
ahead.
Go ahead. And
Okay,
ask. Yeah.
okay, so, because one of them already kind of got way back, so I want to rewind. a little bit
Sure.
first, and then
Sorry,
come
I'm
back to
just
IPAL.
watching the clock here.
On the code of ethics,
Yes.
you made a statement about the goal is to achieve membership acknowledgement. Can you share maybe some of the strategies to accomplish that acknowledgement or enforcement, if you will?
Sure. Well, at a very basic level, we'd like to hear back from you. Do you think any of this language is something you want to adopt?
That's going to come from me in a suggestion later on to our regulations committee. But, yeah.
And if it's not, is there something else we could be providing to you that you would find useful? Or
I would think that our regulation committee, who's developed some guidelines for newly licensed architects, and I think it would be great for that committee to look at the model law and some of the other things that are coming out of NCARB to see if there's any nuggets in there that maybe
Sure.
that committee would want to add to the content of those guidelines. So we'll get back to that
Yes.
later.
so that's what I meant by engagement. You know, what did we do something helpful, or is it just going to go away and no one's going to care?
Right. No, I think it's great. I think we just have to follow through on it.
Yeah.
So circling back to IPAL, and I don't want to cloud any of the accomplishments of IPAL, because I think fundamentally it's a great concept, and I think it'll be successful. But in my opinion, there's a weak link, and the weak link in the IPAL program is to get practitioners to respond to the IPAL program and provide the internships that are needed,
Yes.
or the AXP participation that is needed for the students to accomplish the curriculum. And I have an idea that I'd like to share with you, and I'm
Great.
so happy that you were here.
Sure.
'Cause I don't know who wants to pitch this idea to you all who have firepower to pull it off, if at all. But there was a program years back called the Emerging Professional Companion, which AIA owns, I guess.
It was a publication.
And NCARB used to use that because what it does, the EPC provided a tremendous amount of knowledge with regards to all areas of practice, and had in it exercises and activities to bring and to accomplish that understanding. But it went away from NCARB. My understanding is because the candidates weren't using it, and they weren't accomplishing any credit from it, so it kind of became a useless tool. I happen to think that maybe it was ahead of its time, because the reservation on firms today to provide those internships for these IPAL students is a matter of risk. You're asking a firm to provide the internship for, say, construction administration to a second-year student, and what kind of, bats come home from that.
Yeah.
But if there was a derivative of the EPC, or the Emerging Professional Companion, I'm going to call it the AXPWB, which is the Architectural Experience Workbook. And if it was a derivative of the EPC and created sort of as a template, that firms could then use that template and enter into it active projects in their practice, which would serve on a ground place for these interns to actually get real life experience on real projects, but minimize the risk factor to the firms. It also would foster, I think, mentorship, and it would provide the candidates an opportunity to accomplish the requirements and relevance of the AXP. So if you all would think about that a little bit, I sure would love to see that happen, because to me that's the weak link, is getting firms to engage with schools and provide the internships that are needed.
Well, I think you're right on the money here. Christine Harding, our past president, was adamant during her tenure and even since that we need some sort of a guidance handbook for supervisors of IPAL students, because unlike a regular internship or a regular employment pre-licensure, you can't just sort of meander along and some of what you do counts for AXP and some of it doesn't. You've got to hit all your marks and stay on track, and it's a highly disciplined process. And if the supervisor isn't equipped to do that, it could fail. And I also think where a weak link is that this is where some of the schools are not yet wanting to do IPAL. They're concerned about their capacity to place students in jobs because they don't have a staff person that can be deployed to link up with the alumni network, because it doesn't have to be in the same town as the school. It can be anywhere, or people in the community. Yes, the EPC, it sort of ran out of gas because it was this big encyclopedic book that we actually allowed people to get AXP credit from doing some of the exercises in the book in lieu of working for a licensed practitioner. And I've wondered, along the lines of what you're saying, if we couldn't reinvent it into a, maybe it's an online tool in smaller bites, where it's a go-to thing for people first starting out and working in firms as a prerequisite, or maybe it's a reference tool that the supervisor can direct the employee to get some of their AXP credit from the Emerging Professionals Companion. Whether it's called that or a workbook like you're saying or something else, I think you're right. The whole supervisor to employee relationship is the part we're all worried about.
And I think the AXP workbook could follow the candidate, so they own that. Mm-hmm. But I think what's vital to this concept is that firms are provided with a template, and they actually put projects that they have in the office, active projects, infused into the AXP for the exercises and activities. Yeah. So there's this relevance. And when you do the cost estimating exercise, then you say, okay, well, let's pull up the files and see what was derived in this actual project. Yeah. Because that was the disconnect in the EPC. They had these hypothetical projects that weren't relevant to anything. Yeah. But if I'm an intern, I'm sitting here and Nelson's saying, okay, let's do the estimating exercise on X, Y, and Z high school, and they go through it and they go, okay, now you've got this comparative data that was actually conducted, and it's just a real learning in a way.
Yeah, insert the real world experience of who the client really is that you're working with in the office. Yeah. I hear you. I think it's a great idea. And I'll add one more on top of this issue of the role of the supervisor. I think because we've streamlined a number of our programs, our members are starting to say, so how are we going to keep supervisors accountable? Because anecdotally, we keep hearing about the employee who their boss doesn't really sit down with them and coach them. They don't really give them feedback on their performance. They just sign off, they go online, they give them their AXP credit, but they don't really know if they've done a good job or they're wanting more mentoring than what they're getting. I think this is an ethical issue. Back to ethics for a moment. I think a supervisor that falls down on this responsibility is just as liable for an ethical violation as if they were not treating a client appropriately. And I'd like to see a bigger conversation that would include the AIA around roles and responsibilities of supervisors in mentoring the next generation. We've got a pilot continuing education course that will award HSW credit on supervisor best practices. There's a debate inside our own organization about whether this should be HSW or not. The purists believe that unless it's related directly to your craft as a practitioner, it shouldn't count for HSW. The other argument is that part of your craft is mentoring the next generation to make sure the public remains protected. And so far, that's the point of view that we're taking. But there's a lot more to talk about regarding supervisors.
And the last point I'll make on this topic is that perhaps both NCARB, AIA, even in our own sunset dialogue that we scratch the word streamlined because it conjures up all sorts of negative connotations.
Sounds like we're skipping a step.
Maybe move towards rigorous accelerated programming, because that's really what it is.
I'll try not to use that word.
Thank you.
So very quickly, the exam, as you I think all know, the ARE 4.0 sunsetted at the end of June. And we studied very closely what went wrong when we last transitioned from 3.0 to 4.0 and tried not to repeat any of those mistakes. So we had an 18-month overlap. We over-marketed the sunset because people just don't pay attention. We had less than 10 people who called in with any concerns after the sunset nationally. And in every case, we were able to resolve their issue. So it ended with no drama. It created a surge to the test centers, and it accelerated people's desire to get it done because those that did the transition from 4.0 to 5.0 are now just wanting to get there. So I think we're going to see another drop in time to licensure because of this transition. 5.0, every time we transition to a new exam, the pass rate drops for about a year to a year and a half, and then it comes back up. So we're in that cycle right now. But we've heard from a lot of people, particularly in social media platforms, that the new exam seems more realistic, using case studies to simulate the practice of architecture. Dividing the exam into phases of practice is a lot more logical than the more theoretical approach to siloed subject matter divisions. So we think that this is going to be a success, and also people are getting unofficial instant results now for their exam, which didn't occur before. So that's pretty exciting. And of course, we revised the waiting period. It's now 60 days instead of 6 months. So we're trying to remove the impediments that we've created that are postponing licensure. We are also going to embark upon the design of what we call a shadow exam, where we're going to have additional volunteers writing a parallel version of ARE 5.0 in old style, where it's not in the cloud, it's not electronic, it's hard copy, and it's locked up somewhere, just for the worst case scenario. If there's some sort of data breach, the mother of all data breaches that takes down the cloud or whatever else, that rather than us going dark for 6 months, that we can go to Iron Mountain and grab that parallel exam and put it up and keep going. It would be a huge burden to the profession, to you as licensing boards, and to us as an organization if there was no exam being offered for a time certain. So this is a risk management strategy that our board of directors has endorsed and has been willing to fund. And of course, that exam will require the same updating and maintenance that the real exam does. So this is a planning year for this initiative, and then we're going to spend the next 2 years developing that shadow exam. And then before we know it, in about 2 or 3 years' time, it'll be time to do another practice analysis of architecture, which we do once a decade, where we do an extensive survey to get a snapshot of how the exam is or isn't staying apace with what's relevant from the perspective of the practitioner, from the academic, from the licensing board perspective. The AXP, just to remind you that we introduced several alternatives to the AXP. If you don't turn in your hours within the required reporting period, it used to be you're out of luck. We've now allowed you to submit your hours after the reporting period ends up to 5 years, and you get 50% credit. So you can still get credit for older hours up to 5 years. In addition, we've added another option for those that have hours that are older than 5 years. Again, people that have stepped away from the profession because, raising kids, family illness, being a caregiver for an aging parent, military service, whatever. They got the experience, but they never bothered to report it. You can, instead of doing the traditional AXP of reporting hours, you can take a portfolio of your work and map it to the same criteria that those that are reporting hours are mapping it to. And that will be accepted in lieu of reporting hours if you have effectively given us enough information. So you can't do both. You can't report some hours and then take your older hours and mash them together. You have to do one or the other. But we hope this is another sign that we know that life gets in the way. We know that not everyone's story is the same story, and we want to be sensitive to people who legitimately have experience and just didn't get it reported in time. So that's there. And for those that might be interested in this program, it's best that they call one of our specialists at the office and they can walk them through the details. I don't have any more updates on any of the items you listed. You may have other questions, or you may want to go back and discuss some of these.
Sure.
But
I'm sure there are questions. Ebony?
I appreciated your addressing the commitment to diversity. Can you speak more about the strategies that you guys are implementing to increase diversity?
Sure. And now, are you talking about diversity?
Within the profession, within NCARB, I know you said that you have your staff reflects diversity, but does that look like at the top of your executive leadership at NCARB? And then just on boards?
Okay. Well, let me start with the member boards. We have specifically asked the AIA component community, those that are able to lobby their governors, to work with us on developing a waiting list of people, an on-deck circle, if you will, of people who might be activated to be nominated to serve on state licensing boards. And we're also having that same conversation with NOMA and with others about who are the 5 people out there that we would want to have in the ready should an opening occur on a licensing board. And we want to develop an early warning system so that as we know as terms are expiring on state boards, we can have enough time to have this conversation so that the governor has a nice variety of names to choose from. So that's how we're trying to influence that process. We're sort of influencing the influencers. We don't want to get in the... we're a national organization. This is a state government issue. We don't think it's appropriate for us to go knock on the door of the governor. But we want to equip those that do have influence with the governor to have a diverse list of names.
What about just general diversity in the profession? Because we had partnerships with universities and schools. We're seeing a lot of international students that are there. So what's the discussion around training and education for those who are going to be practicing in our country?
So at the sort of I call the collateral table, where it's us and the ACSA and the NAB and AIA and AIS, we all think we have a role in this. And we're all trying to determine what are the pinch points that are preventing us from having a more diverse profession. When it comes to international students, there are several challenges. One is the immigration policy of the U.S. government. When student visas expire and they don't yet have all their AXP, yes, you can get up to half of your AXP working for a foreign architect, and yes, you can take the ARE in multiple locations around the world. But still, if these international students want to become licensed practitioners in the U.S., there's a fundamental visa issue that's at stake with the federal government, which is something in the current administration is really problematic. But we think for schools that have moved from STEM to STEAM, where they are positioning their students to have visas for a longer period of time, that's possibly an opportunity to get people through the pipeline before their visa expires, but that's up to the individual schools to apply for that status. Some architecture schools are doing that, and so the academy has to do this. That's up to them to create that environment for foreign students. What we do regarding foreign licensees is we're one of the few countries in the world that has a program for foreign licensees. If you have a license in good standing that is current from a foreign country, we will waive the education requirement and only require you to do AXP and take the exam. Very few other countries, if you're an American licensee and you want to go to France to get an architecture license, there's no shortcut. You have to start over. You have to go to French architecture school and do it their way. So licensure globally requires both sides to be at the table. It can't be one-sided. So we have mutual recognition agreements now with Canada, Mexico, Australia, and New Zealand. We're looking into one with the United Kingdom should the Brexit, post-Brexit climate allow for them to have independent negotiation. And if there are other countries that have a similar 3Es approach that our licensing boards would allow, then we'll pursue more reciprocal licenses, which will help to some degree with diversity. The other issue in the academy is that people want to go to school and they want to work where they know there are people there that look like them. So what are we doing about diversity at the tenured faculty level, at the dean and department chair level? We've seen a wave in the last year or two of women being appointed to senior positions on faculties around the country, which is a good start. And enrollment is much more diverse. We're getting close to gender parity in school. We're seeing an uptick in Asian American and Latino Hispanic enrollment. African American is remaining static. And so I don't know why that is, why architecture is not as attractive as a career choice, and I don't know if it's because there are other options that pay more money, because as some of you can attest, architects don't make the kind of money that people think they do. If it seems everyone thinks you have to be a math whiz to do architecture, I thought that. That's one of the reasons I didn't pursue architecture. I don't know if that's really true or not. Or are there other design professions? You have a passion for design. Maybe you're just going to pick something else. But I know that NOMA and the Academy and the AIA are trying to do research into what causes someone to decide this versus that. I know a lot of local AIA components are doing what they call boot camp exercises with middle school and high school students, especially through the Hip Hop Architecture Initiative and other urban-focused initiatives, to try to expose architecture as a possible profession to an under-informed population. We just recently gave a grant to Hip Hop Architecture to do a boot camp in Washington, D.C. So we are looking for ways through financial contributions and sending our own staff out who are from underrepresented groups to act as spokespersons so this people who look like me issue can be addressed. Our senior team of directors and assistant directors, we have a number of African American, Latino staff, also gay as well as straight, and a good sampling of women. I would say if you look at our top tier of staff, it's quite diverse. And we are fortunate in Washington, D.C. because we have a more diverse pool to recruit from than some other areas of the country. And then, as I said earlier, if we can get volunteers from more diverse backgrounds to serve on committees, they become sort of the training camp to serve on licensing boards. They've served on a committee for a few years. They meet the minimum practice requirement. We can add them to the list and say, now, Governor, consider this person. They've got some experience under their belt. They'd be a great board member. So this is going to have to be a sustained effort. It's not just a flash in the pan, and it's going to require many hands. And Josh's team is trying to develop a number of systems to track and talk to the right organizations, and I don't know if you want to add anything here.
Yeah, we have partnerships with a number of organizations as well and are focusing on this. I think that last piece as well about making sure that the committees are diverse, giving people from diverse backgrounds an opportunity to experience the difference between advocating for the profession and focusing on regulating it to benefit the public creates a larger pool of people that governors could call upon. The one other thing I wanted to add, Ms. Lewis, is we every year we publish NCARB by the numbers, which is seen in the arena as the definitive set of data and information and statistics about that pipeline. So this is a difficult conversation to have always. It's always a little bit easier when it's based on facts. You can't really argue with the facts and the data. So thanks to our record holders and the information that we collect as NCARB, but also thanks to our member boards, we publish that each year. We know how many licensed architects there are around the country, but we also know what the pipeline looks like. And we can bring that data to the table to say, okay, here's where we are. Things are trending in most places in the right direction, not fast enough, and it will take a long time to impact that larger pool of 110,000 licensed architects. But where are the gaps, where are the pinch points? That's all based on that conversation with that data that we publish both in hard copy and online and break down for folks. So hopefully that's contributing to the conversation being productive as well.
One of the things I'm finding intriguing, and I don't know if it'll have momentum, but George Miller, former president of AIA National, who's on the New York board, white male, just said it at our last annual meeting. He said, step aside. Mm-hmm. To my colleagues who are on the leadership track in the regions, who are white males, and you know that there are people moving up the ladder that represent other underrepresented groups, step aside. You don't have to keep climbing. You can stay here and let somebody jump over you. And I think the peer-to-peer conversation has to happen too. Can't just come from me or the president. But I know the AIA for a long time has had a focus on diversity in the profession. Bill Bates, the incoming president, is African American. His successor, Jane Frederick, a woman from South Carolina. They've had a number of women presidents recently. Asian American woman from Texas was president several years ago. But these are symbols. You know, what about the rank and file? I think that's what we're really concerned about, and we hope there's a bubble moving. The statistics seem to suggest that there is. That as women pierce that glass ceiling of becoming senior partners in firms, as they become deans and administrators and college presidents, and people of color do the same thing, that should then beget more of the same. But all of us have to speak up and step aside if necessary. That's the only way it's going to work.
She has a question.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm going to make a comment that I think goes unsaid quite often, and I think that to Ebony's point, is that we have a program within our organization here at the Architect Board of California that we're all assigned colleges and universities so that we can update what's going on, what are you doing, how are the undergrads getting into the graduate program. There is a disconnect that when they graduate and they're ready to go to the graduate program, they can't get into the program because international students are taking their slots.
Oh.
And then they're leaving back to their countries, which is great. We want to educate. The problem is that we are creating a void that I believe, personally, that in 10, 15, 20 years, we're going to have a void.
I didn't realize that.
And unless we address it, and we've been banging on the table here, and all of us collectively understand that there's a challenge. And every time we go to different universities, we ask the same question. What are you doing to ensure that California residents or United States-born students are getting into your program? Not 60%, 70% of the students are international students, and then they have to wait in line, and then they could never get into the program. So that's an issue that we have to address, because that's the only way we're going to fix the issue of diversity and United States born students.
So when every year our board invites the three smaller collaterals to send their leaders to our board meetings. So September, the ACSA President-elect and executive visit with us. January, the NAB President-elect executive meet with us. And in April, AIS President-elect executive meet with us. And then we meet separately with the AIA leadership. Our board has asked this question, Josh, I'm remembering, of the ACSA, the impression that because international students pay higher tuition and the schools need those dollars to survive, that they are foreclosing opportunities for U.S.-born students. They deny that that's what's happening. So I don't know what the answer is, I don't know if California and other states are going to have to get involved in regulating the admissions process in schools, especially public state schools. There's a lot of regulation already of the academy. They would argue there's too much. I don't know the answer here.
I don't know the answer either,
Yeah.
but it's definitely a topic that we need to address because it is going to be a problem, a long-term problem that we are not really opening our eyes to.
Well, it then
10,
becomes the
20,
pipeline
30.
issue, right?
Right, totally.
And it is true, and I'm glad you brought this up. What we do find is that we have international students coming here for the cachet of an American degree, but most of them really don't intend to stay in the U.S.
Yeah.
They intend to go back home. Now, some of them, once they get here and they like living here, they change their mind, but a lot of them just want the cachet of a U.S. degree, and the schools love that higher tuition dollar.
Which is another thing that we need to address with the APAL program, that if the student is not committed to stay, do we then give that opportunity to the international student or to the local student that is going to stay and needs the experience to get their license?
Well, right now, I don't know of any IPAL program that is disqualifying anyone who's interested. So once you're in the school, but your issue is even getting in the school.
It's a compounded problem, though, because when these graduates enter the workforce, the American firms then have to pay the salaries, which are completely outrageous compared to their counterparts coming out of school. So since they can't get the sponsorships, they're forced to leave the country because they aren't able to accomplish gainful employment.
Even the ones that want to stay.
Even the ones that want to stay. So it's really the problem is sort of just like not working at two different ends.
Yeah, we've got. I mean, this is a hot mess because on the one hand, we as a country are not currently broadcasting hospitality toward immigrants, and yet at the same time, there's a concern about opportunity for U.S. born, and both issues are valid, right? Yeah. How do you reconcile the two and do the right thing?
Other questions?
There's a head scratcher. Well, we'll be around, and we're going to come to lunch as well. Excellent. So and I know your sunshine laws, we don't want any serious ex parte discussions, counselor, so we'll make sure that it stays at a very light level. But we're here the rest of the day, and we're just happy to have this time with you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Very, very helpful.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. We'll see you in a little bit.
Yeah.
So, the next item is we need to entertain a motion to approve the June 13th, 2018 board minutes.
Second.
All those in favor? Oh, all right, okay.
Campaign, aye. Pascal Gutierrez.
Hi.
Sylvia Kwan.
Aye.
Ebony Ruiz.
Aye.
Matthew McGannis. Aye. Robert Hillman. Aye. Neil Serrano.
Aye.
Barry Williams, absent.
Right. Thank you. So motion passes. We have about half an hour left before we're going to adjourn or I should say take a break for lunch. So item F is Executive Officer's Report. Do you think you can get through some of it, Laura?
Oh, I can get through all of it.
Yay! Excellent. She's very efficient.
I will be brief.
Okay.
I'm sure you've all seen the packet, so I'm just going to go through the highlights, but feel free to stop me if you have any questions as I go through it. To start with, our next meeting is going to be December 13th and 14th in Sacramento, and that will include strategic planning. We have some information here about business modernization. Not a whole lot has changed since the June board meeting. We are still pursuing with DCA the option of accepting credit card payments for license renewals. So we'll meet with them again shortly to see where we are in that process. We were looking at launching in November for that, but we'll need to keep working with OIS to see. The time frame will be dependent partially on whether or not we charge a convenience fee to licensees in order to accept credit card payment. So I'll have more of an update by the next board meeting.
November of this year?
Yes.
Good.
We have information here on legislation, but that's going to be covered later in the agenda. Did want to note that the staff worked with DCA's Office of Public Affairs and the Contractors Board to put an article in the Consumer Connection magazine in June aimed at property owners recovering after a natural disaster. We have some information on page 5 about our website. The DCA is working on a new web license lookup feature. And so that is going through testing and verification. And then starting on page 5 onto page 6 and 7, information on the pass rates for the ARE for 5.0, and then also the finishing up for ARE 4.0 on page 7.
Nelson, any comment on that?
I always
has
have comment. It's just that, for instance, we have this failure rate that I think needs to be addressed, and I know we address it every time we go to the universities and speak about this, but it just doesn't, I can't wrap my head around why it's always so high, like project planning and design. It looks like we've got 57% failed. Anything that's over 50 is just not acceptable, I feel, because it's just such a costly education, and when we can't get our students to pass, it's just, then it slows them and it makes them feel like, they're not moving fast enough to a career that they've chosen. So.
But you remember what Mike said earlier in his presentation, that this is the first tranche of test takers on 5.0, and that there is a pattern where the fail rate or the pass rate goes down, and then it comes back up. Right. So I think you're going to see this change, we hope, because, these are pretty high numbers.
Right. Well, let's hope that we get our next ones in a quarter. Yeah, it's okay. Let's hope that
that should start improving.
Okay, and perhaps we'll put some more information in the packet next time.
But in context of Mike being here, so the early testers from California on 5.0 was passing rate was lower, and so the passing rate was lower. So the trending is very clear. Right. I mean, the California test takers adopted this new, testing system, and I think it's designed particularly suitable for Californian test. I see them will be normalized, very soon. So in that regards, I think the test is going in the right direction.
Could I say something? The one thing that I did see reverse, which was like, finally, on 4.0, the lowest score traditionally was always construction documents, which was like, that's like the backbone of what an architect does, Right. And in 5.0, it's like up to 64, so at least we moved in the right direction of fundamentals.
Right. Yeah. Well, actually, I'm looking at, you're looking at all of 2018. I was just looking at July. Okay, so we should probably look at quarters 1 and 2 combined. Okay. Yeah, so 64 passed, because that was the one that was always low.
40s.
Always.
But you can already see that project planning and design, which was just abysmal in July, when you combine 2 quarters, it kind of evened out a little, starting to already trend more positive. You probably don't have this, our 2 guests.
There's copies back there.
Okay. You might want to go to, because it shows very clearly, with facts, what's factual documentation. It's on.
This is page 7 under tab F.
Yes, very, very informative about California candidates, which is our primary area of interest.
Yeah.
I mean, it's trending. It's starting to.
We did get an inquiry yesterday. We met with AIA San Francisco and then AIA East Bay, and because they're both doing different versions of test prep training, they're curious to know whether their sub-geographic areas of the state are showing a better pass rate than other areas of the state, so they can see whether their test prep programs are making a difference. So we said we would try to look into that. I mean, I'm sure those numbers are crunchable, whether we want to take the time to do that and then get down the slippery slope of doing it for everybody. I'm not sure.
We might be able to, though, for California.
Yeah. Well, I told them they should start by calling you guys.
Yeah, why don't we,
Call the
pass the
CME.
buck. Pass the buck.
Yeah.
No, I think we can do something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
it sounds like a very interesting idea. You know why? Because we're at the very beginning
Yeah.
of this 5.0. So it would be informative to find out if this test prep approach or that
Right.
test prep approach is more efficacious and therefore
Valuable.
push people toward the right test prep.
Well, speaking of which, I could have mentioned in my report, I think you may be aware that we have a new test prep initiative at NCARB where we're inviting the entire test prep industry to consider being sanctioned by NCARB. And if they allow us to audit their materials to make sure none of the materials are misleading and that they're accurately, without stealing data, preparing people, then they can use the NCARB seal of approval on their marketing materials. And so Black Spectacles has agreed to do that. They're the only ones so far, but we think the rest of the industry may follow suit. But it's a way for us to audit because we've heard anecdotally that a lot of test prep information is outdated, or it says stuff's in the test that really isn't in the test, or it distracts people from not preparing for the right things, and that doesn't help anybody. We're not going to divulge our data, and we're going to keep a straw man, a wall between our examination staff and volunteers and the test prep people. So there's a ethical divide there, but the test prep approach with a new exam is really critical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, if staff could kind of think about that. I just want to give you an anecdote when you mentioned Black Spectacles. My firm, which is 1,200 people, bought the Black Spectacles test prep for the entire firm. So whoever is taking an exam can enter Black Spectacles and take that course for free.
Wow.
So it's just something.
Yeah.
I mean, I thought that was kind of a really nice way of not putting the onus on paying for prep to each individual test.
And the fact that you as a firm are incentivizing people to take the exam, that's really great.
Yeah, and then there's Black Spectacles testing, study groups that have occurred, so it's pretty good, yes.
Not to be Debbie Down here, but I always understood, because I raised those same questions early on about where can we steer people to get better results on the test and everything. And I've been told the whole time that that's not our purview, that we're not supposed to be directing people to those kind of areas, because then we're getting in lockstep, and that takes us out of our regulatory situation. And so I just wanted to put that out there to see if that's still the current thinking, or is that going to change? Or
well, NCARB is a nonprofit, so they can certify.
They can do it all day long, which is great.
Right.
That's great, but we just can't endorse that.
Correct. Right. We won't.
Great. All right.
Yeah, we won't endorse it. We'll just use it.
No, it's great that it's developing. I mean, there's a clear need for it. Right. But just as a board, whether we endorse it or not was the question.
I don't think you need our endorsement, correct?
No, and I think he's right. It's best if you don't.
Right.
But I think if people ask, you can say, well, you can check with NCARB.
There you go. Punt it back to you.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Keep going.
Okay. On page 9, we have statistics on our California supplemental exam. Stay pretty consistent. Also to note that the board previously approved going forward with regulations to change the amount of time frame to reduce the wait time between taking versions of the CSE, so that's something staff is working on.
Right.
The next professional qualifications committee is scheduled for the end of October in Sacramento.
So Laura, just make sure. So we're moving towards 90 days. If staff sign, it's okay. Everything's in order.
Right.
Okay, good.
Right.
Very good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We've already talked to Office of Professional Exam Services about that, and they're comfortable with the change.
It does require regulatory approval, so we're processing the regulatory package for that.
Okay. If you see a certainty of make it happen, just a question for the communication committees. Should you let the potential
Yes, we have already considered about how soon we'll publicize that and how we'll do that.
Okay.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, very good.
Okay, and then on page 10, as I said, information on the regulatory proposal is planned for the CSE, with some further information about that process. And then on On page 10, on page 11, information about our enforcement actions. You can note in here that we are working on creating a contract with the collection agency to improve collection rate of outstanding amounts owed to the board. It's also something covered in our sunset review report. And then on page 13, we are also working on the regulatory proposal to allow the executive officer to delegate to a designee the authority to hold an informal conference with an individual that's received a citation, as well as regulations to update the board's disciplinary guidelines. And on page 15, there's information on the Regulatory Enforcement Committee, which will be covered later on in the agenda, their meeting from last month, as well as mention of the written contract changes that the board has considered in the past. This will also be addressed in the REC portion and that as well in our sunset review report. Any questions on any of those provisions? And then LATC will be covered a little bit later in the agenda, so I'm not going to go into that in detail at this point. Any other questions?
Okay, so now do you want to go continue on to item G, which is proposed legislation?
Sure. So at this point, the legislature is adjourned for the year, so any legislation that is still active is with the governor for his action. He has until the end of the month to sign or veto or allow bills to become law without a signature. So I think the board's already discussed all of these bills, so there's just information updating the status. So this, just wanted to give a brief update to the board. AB 2138 that the board has discussed previously changes the types of convictions the board, a licensing board can deny an applicant's application for based on their criminal history. So, as the board knows, we don't fingerprint applicants, so this bill would allow us to still ask applicants to voluntarily disclose that information, so it wouldn't change how we're currently receiving information from applicants.
So on, Laura, on number 3, Senate Bill 721.
Yeah.
Last meeting we had a discussion that we will reach out to the authors, and it's in progress.
I did have a discussion with the author's office.
This is the balcony issue.
This is the balcony bill. I listened to the board's discussion. I sent a letter expressing the board's concerns to the author's office and had a conversation with his staff around this bill. They did not make any amendments after we sent the letter, but I know it's something that Senator Hill's worked on for a couple of years, and it's a pretty significant issue for him, and so it may just have been that we were a little bit late in the process, as it's something he's worked on for a couple of years. But it's also, if the governor does sign it, it's certainly something that there could be follow-up legislation, so we can continue working with the author's office if it does happen to get signed. But I did send the letter and have that discussion.
So does it look like what's the word out there? Will he sign or veto it?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Question on procedure: when the governor gets a bill like that, does he also have all the backup information? See the letter that you wrote?
Our governor reads everything.
I trust that, but I'm just curious whether or not he sees that letter that we put out.
Yes, he will see letters submitted.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know the procedure-wise. Can I jump to our audience? No, I can't. Huh? I want to ask Mark if AIA is going to take any position at all.
Squeaky door.
Squeaky door. We need to.
Mark, are you aware of AIA is going to take any position on this bill, balcony bill?
AI California Council on SB 721.
Yeah.
AI California Council did not take a position on SB 721.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So I skipped ahead, so you can see. So item number 2, AB 2483. That bill is dead for the year. It did not make it to the governor's desk. The same for item 4, SB 984. At number 5, SB 1137 is on the governor's desk, and SB 1480. That one, I don't think we have the up-to-date status here, but that also made it to the governor's desk, so we're waiting action on that. And then the text is in the packet after the update if there's any specific questions on any of the language.
So one bill relates to diversity. Are we going to discuss later, or we can ask Kathy now? It requires the corporate boards have a certain woman percentage on board, we mandate that.
That is item number 4, SB 984.
So just
State
to-
boards and commissions, state boards. So it's only public boards, not corporate boards, correct? Okay.
Public include the public traded company? No.
No.
Well, I know that there is a bill on that, and is that a federal bill? Does anybody know?
It's in Congress. It's Senator Warren.
So it is federal, yes. Do you have, oh, he was just trying to hear? Were you just
I
trying
think
to
he's gonna
listen?
add.
There's California, I think there's.
There was a companion bill.
No, the one's right here. That's what we're talking about.
But that's one for public boards.
Correct.
Yeah.
But I believe Senator Hannah-Beth Jackson has legislation that would require diversity of sorts. I think female participation on private corporate boards of companies that are located in California.
Really? Okay.
I believe, depending on the size of the board, it will mandate a minimum number of female board members.
And that's just going through the process now.
That,
so.
I believe, is on the governor's desk awaiting his decision.
Wow.
I can send an
don't
update.
remember the bill number, I apologize, but I believe it's Senator Hannah-Beth Jackson who has that bill.
I can send an update once the governor's time period is passed and we have final action on all the bills and include that one as well and send it to the board members
so
and
in
then
case
include it in the
we
next
need to
packet.
take action on it. Yeah.
That's very
Thank you.
interesting.
I thought we discussed it and you weren't taking a position last
No,
meeting.
someone mentioned, but we did not. I
Okay.
recall we did not start that discussion.
Okay.
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 What else?
That's
That's it?
it for legislation.
Wow, that was fast. Okay. Kristen, can you do yours in 10 minutes or 12 minutes? Item H, the rec report. I mean, Regulatory and Enforcement Committee. Rec.
So the first item is an update on August 23rd, 2018 RDC meeting. The RDC met just a few weeks ago in Sacramento and discussed each of its assigned strategic plan objectives. I'm only going to touch on the two that aren't later covered in the agenda. The RDC at the meeting reviewed and discussed proposed changes to the board's building official information guide and provided some feedback. Our next step is staff is going to consult with DCA legal counsel regarding those proposed revisions, and a final draft of the building official guide is planned to be presented to the RDC for review and approval at its next meeting. The RDC also discussed its objective to educate consumers on the standard of care so they understand what to expect from an architect when choosing to hire one. The RDC, during the discussion, again expressed concerns with the legal implications, intended or unintended, with defining the standard of care for consumers. As a result, staff will be researching case law and history on the topic of the standard of care, and then we plan to work with a subcommittee of REC members to develop what that message is going to be to consumers.
Standard of care, wow. That's interesting.
That one that everybody points to, but nobody can define.
Yes. It's interesting. Standard of care ends up being a very important sort of line in the sand. And you're right, nobody can really define what that means. Okay, so that's great.
Moving along, so there were, like I had said, there were 3 objectives from the REC strategic plan that they did make recommendations to the full board on. The first of which was to measure the effectiveness of the board's citation collection methods as a means of protecting future consumers. So we've been tracking the board's citation collection rate over the past 2 years as part of this objective. Currently, the past 5 years, our citation collection rate is 59%, with collection rates of 81% for licensees and 43% for unlicensed individuals. That collection rate has increased approximately 5% since this time last year when we provided the last update. As Laura had mentioned, staff is in the process of working with the Department of Consumer Affairs to secure a contract with the collection agency to refer unpaid accounts aged beyond 90 days to the agency. And that contract is expected to be executed in early 2019. The REC briefly discussed this objective at its meeting, and they voted to recommend to the board that this objective be carried over to the next strategic plan so that there would be additional data collected from the collection agency that could then be assessed in terms of effectiveness. So with that, the board is asked to consider the REC's recommendation.
To basically push it to the next, which is December. We're going to have the strategic plan in December, so we will talk about it then.
Correct. The recommendation is that the board consider including either the same objective or a similar objective in its next plan. So it would, I guess, be looking for the board to agree that this would be discussed.
That we want to continue working on it.
Exactly.
Okay, so we need a motion and a vote. Okay. Do I hear a motion on agreeing with the recommendation of REC?
Yes, I have a question.
Okay.
When, how long do you think it will take you guys to define what, or try to, your attempt of trying to identify the standards of care?
It's something that we're doing the research portion right now. I anticipate a lot of that discussion is going to include working closely with legal, just getting that research on what that is. We haven't identified, I guess, a target on when we expect that to be complete, but it's something we're working on.
Yeah, we didn't discuss it. We can certainly provide an update at the next board meeting.
Yeah.
I would think we would have made a good amount of progress by the next meeting.
Yes.
I don't know if you know or not, but a couple of years ago, Bob, our consultant, pointed to the Practice Act where the standard of care is sort of defined or stated. Do you know where that is? Because it was like in some little corner with a left turn upstairs.
I do. It's in the Rules of Professional Conduct, and it's found within our regulations. It's Title 16, California Code of Regulations, Section 160A2.
Could you email that to us?
Impressive.
Yeah.
You would
Rolled right off the top of her head.
Thank you.
Okay, back to the motion.
Yeah, I
Oh,
move
question?
to accept the recommendation of the REC.
Okay, roll call, yeah.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Ebony. Okay.
Yang Beng, yes. Pascal Gutierrez,
Yes.
Sylvia Kwong.
Yes.
Ebony Ruiz,
Yes.
Matthew McGinnis.
Yes.
Robert Pierman,
Yes.
Nilta Serrano,
Yes.
Barry Williams, absent.
Okay, motion passes. Okay, Kristen? Educational materials.
So the REC was also assigned an objective to develop educational materials for newly licensed architects to provide more information on the requirements in order to avoid future violations. To address this objective and further educate new licensees about the Act and the various filing requirements within that Act, staff had created a draft new licensee information guide outlining various requirements and things that we thought would be important for new architects to know once they receive their license. As far as the format for the document, we had created almost a checklist on the first page just as an overview of the requirements, and then as you go further into the document, you get additional information explaining the entire requirement. The REC reviewed and discussed this guide at its August 23rd meeting, and they voted to approve the draft guide. They also directed staff to work with legal counsel and then present the board with the publication at its next meeting. Following that meeting, staff did consult with legal and made a few minor edits to the document, and then it's now in the packet. We're asking that the board approve it or provide any feedback if there were any questions. And then after the guide has been approved by the board, our intention is to work with the Department of Consumer Affairs Office of Publications Design and Editing on the design and format of the publication, make it more user-friendly and presentable. And then that guide would be distributed to each newly licensed architect with their license, and we would also post it on the website for all licensees in the public to access.
Do you have a question? So my question is this: once it gets into the onto the website, then will all these links be clickable?
Yes.
Okay. Because that's how people work now.
Yeah.
They're not going to necessarily keep a copy of this hard copy at their desk.
Right.
Whenever they have a particular issue, they're just going to click.
Right.
Okay, so that's good. Good to know. Yes. Motion. Question.
Yeah, well, what I wanted to do is congratulate the committee on the work that they did for the new license information guide. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But I would like to request a couple of items from the committee. One, that you insert somewhere in there, if you consider inserting there the standard of care definition as it exists now in the Practice Act.
Standard of care.
Pardon me?
And
if
ethics.
we will start implementing the ethics, for defining that for the profession.
So it would be good to at least point to it, because there's a checklist of where to look.
Right.
Also would request that the committee consider a supplemental document that is one for experienced architects, and maybe it's a best practices, because architects come, they get licensed, and then we never see them again until they misbehave. So they kind of lose touch with practice, not the practice, but regulation of practice and the parameters of good conduct, if you will. So a best practices supplemental book would be great, or reference would be good to have. And when you look at that supplemental booklet, that maybe you also peek at the model law that's being modernized and see if there's any little nuggets in there that could be of value and content to the best practices book. Other than that, it's a great job, I think. Good start. Yeah.
But actually, that's great. Ebony, you brought up a good point, because on this particular chart, I don't see an issue called ethics or a section called ethics. I'm just wondering if we shouldn't go ahead and put that in there now.
It would have to point to something in the Practice Act, and the only thing that I can think that it even points to would be rules of conduct. And that isn't that already in here?
I didn't see it.
It's on page 4.
Does it take you? Does that take you to
So
the standard
section
of care?
160 that Kristen spoke about earlier, it's on page 4 of the guide.
Okay, rules of conduct.
But other than that, I don't think we govern ethics in general.
Yeah. Do we not?
I mean, there's usually a provision in the Practice Act that covers
I see.
a certain area, but other than that, can you think of anything else, Kristen?
No, the ethics aren't covered in the Practice Act, so that's why it wasn't included in this document.
So I feel the same way as Pascal, that the information is very helpful. So the question for both your committee and the communication committee, some of this material or all of those will be made available on our website?
Yes.
That's what you're saying.
That's the plan? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah?
I think
So
Sharon.
maybe-
Tara
maybe
first.
go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, Tara first and then.
I'm hovering.
Some of the discussion about ethics that we heard from NCARB earlier
Right.
was about employee-employer intern relations.
That's true.
And that's not the purview of this board.
Okay.
So I want to,
Good
clarify
point.
that those
Good
ethical
point.
standards, that's actually monitored by a completely different state agency. You're concerned with the practice of architecture.
Okay.
Not sexual harassment.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So to the extent that there's anything additional than what's currently listed under your rules of professional conduct, if there's something else that would protect consumers, that might be something to look at in the future, but that would be a regulatory change. As far as ethics goes, we don't have anything else to add.
I see.
Because we're really trying to just say, hey, these are the laws.
Yeah. Pascal?
Yeah, so in that page 4, the subparagraphs A, B, C, D, if one of them were titled standard of care, that would be terrific.
So this is just citing what our current regulations are, so you're suggesting a
Right,
change?
just as a building block until maybe that gets developed and refined and expanded upon and whatever.
Well, the strat plan objective that Kristen was speaking to before on the standard of care might evolve into a regulation that would require a regulatory proposal.
Right, but at least we'd have a place card holder.
Right.
If you will.
Tara?
Okay, so I just want to clarify, what you're asking for is a standard of care discussion later to change and update the regulations.
I understand that there is lingo in there, and to what was so eloquently pointed out.
No, it doesn't use the actual phrase standard of care.
It doesn't use it. It's under a subheading of competence, but that's essentially what.
Competence. Oh, yeah, there it is. It's exactly competence. That is standard of care.
Yeah, but that phrase keeps eluding everybody. So competence, standard of care would be awesome.
Well, I think the publication has to reflect exactly what is in our regulations,
Yes.
but as we look at whether we need to change, that can be part of it.
Okay.
And
So,
we'll grab it at the Model Law Task Force group too. Right, Josh?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Back to ethics for a moment. That is a really interesting point you brought up, Tara, about what we're supposed to do and what other people are supposed to do regarding ethics. And yet, on the other hand, NCARB at the national level is having that conversation. And where are you putting that bucket, that ethics bucket? Is that going to be part of model law? Or is it just rules of conduct? But where does that belong in your work? Because you are putting a lot, and I know because I attended that national meeting,
right?
And it was a real strong subtext of that conference was how to deal with this issue.
Well, our quandary was that we know that each state looks at this issue slightly differently. And there may or may not be a statutory opening for you to have scope or authority to even do it. So we put this down as a marker, as an aspirational goal that each of you, as you are best able, to wrestle with this issue and see what you can do, what you can't do, where it fit, where it doesn't fit. But I guess one of the questions is that if there is a finding by a court of law that someone, let's say, has either been found guilty of or is pled to a sexual harassment charge, does this board have authority to regulate a license based upon a adverse finding to a licensee, or does it have to be narrowly within the scope of client-practitioner relations, for example, or can it? I mean, I assume if someone's convicted of murder or rape or theft or a moral turpitude crime, there's scope to discipline. But what about some of these other things? Is there scope or not?
Well, okay, so trend-wise, we're getting toward limiting the application of convictions of crimes and how that affects licensure. So, we've got 2138 right now, which is going to limit the ability to consider crimes older than 7 years in applying to licensure. So we're already, kind of starting to, lower the bar a bit. If we're talking about sexual harassment,
that's a civil finding, right? Not a criminal.
It's a civil finding. It's not criminal. So then, how would the board justify even looking at that? Does that affect the practice of the profession?
And so that's the debate. If it besmirches the reputation of the profession, is the profession obliged to police its own in terms of a disciplinary action around licensure? And if you philosophically believe you should, do you then have the scope or the authority to do that?
Well,
and that's a case-by-case basis in each state, I guess is what I'm saying.
Arguably that should be left to the employer, corporation, company to figure out whether or not they need to take action to protect the name of their firm, their other employees, and the profession itself. So, I think we just need to make sure that we're operating within the lines that we have. Because we can't police everything.
Right.
Would it be appropriate to benchmark what the California Medical Board does? Because they're being in contact with our consumers as well. So that I would think that we would want to have at least some sort of standards of how you're engaging with people.
Maybe, because that's a healing arts board, and they have a different set of criteria with respect to whether or not a crime fits the profession. And, architecture is about building, but, healing arts, that's hands-on the patient. So when we're talking about assault, sexual violence against a patient, that's different than what you guys typically are looking at.
Yeah. There's a lot of emotion around this issue. When the Richard Meyer thing broke, people started asking us, well, so what if he gets kicked out of the AIA? He still can practice architecture. What are you going to do about it, NCARB? And our response was, well, we don't do anything. It's up to the state licensing boards as to whether they have legal authority to do anything.
And they probably don't.
And I would say right now most don't.
Yeah.
So
like us.
Is there a legal basis for creating additional criteria, or is this the kind of thing where even if society is saying this person should not be allowed to practice architecture because they can't be trusted to act in a professional way? Is a professional conduct standard inclusive of employee to employer relations and client to architect relations, or is it only with about whether? I mean, some of your disciplinary cases today talk about how people misrepresented themselves when they applied for renewal. How far is that away from other bad behaviors that could be disciplined? I'm as a recovering lawyer, I can argue both sides of the argument. We're handing it to you as a starting point for a discussion. We think the discussion needs to be had.
Totally. I think the board should have that awareness and start a process of observing and see how this almost movement will impact our variation of the ethics. But I think the situation we have, it's already exists. For example, your architect could engage spouse abuser, for example, abusing.
Right.
Architect could engage maybe a questionable firing in employment, but these issues has not been really our enforcement in any measure, right? So in a sexual harassment, in a similar context, except that the Me Too movement make it more political and higher awareness. So my urge to the board is observing and see how this develops and influences our regulatory requirement and
for the future.
That's my view.
Bob, I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to do a hard stop right now. And we'll resume the discussion on this matter, so we're not going to take action right now. Okay? We'll see you back here about probably 1:40 at this point, because we're going to take an hour and a half. Thank you.
Yeah, it's supposed to be.
Okay.